Lillian Smith was born in 1897 in Jasper, a small North Florida town near the Georgia border and the vastness of the Okefenokee Swamp. Her family moved to the North Georgia mountains in Lillian's late teenage years, and she remained a citizen of Clayton until she died. The story of Lillian Smith, novelist, essayist, and outspoken liberal activist, is that of a woman working to reconstruct the world, to create not just a place for herself in the world, but a world where she could find meaning and be heard. At the core of her being was her life as an artist, and that life flowed seamlessly into her social activism. She was a best-selling and award-winning writer, and a tireless public advocate for human and civil rights in a time and place where many remained silent. Many words have been written and spoken about Lillian Smith, but her own words offer the most eloquent encounter with her. Hear them now.
I do not remember how or when, but by the time I had learned that God is love, that Jesus was his Son and came to give us more abundant life, and that all men are brothers with a common Father in heaven, I also knew that I was better than a Negro, that all black folks have their place and must be kept in it, and that a terrifying disaster would befall the South if I ever treated a Negro as my social equal. I had also learned that it is possible to be both a Christian and a white Southerner simultaneously, to pray at night and ride a Jim Crow car in the morning and feel comfortable doing both. I learned those things the way all my Southern people learned them then, by closing door after door until my mind, my heart, and my conscience were cut off from each other and from reality. I closed those doors, or perhaps they were closed for me, but I was lucky. Somewhere along the way, they began to open again. My father used to tell us, you have your heritage, some of it good, some of it not so good. But the past is done. It has been lived, it is over. The future is yours. The question is, what are you going to do with it? I was born and reared in a small, deep South town, the population of which was about equally Negro and white. And there were 9 of us. I had 5 brothers and 3 sisters. And I was third from last, followed by my sister Esther, who became one of my closest lifelong friends. We were aware that we were a respected and important family in town. And we were given such advantages of schooling, music, and art as were available in the South at that time. We were trained to think that learning was important, and that each of us should take advantage of our opportunities and grow up to do something of genuine usefulness. And though we were well supplied with both, we were also told 10,000 times that status and money were not important, and that the teachings of Jesus were important and could be practiced if we tried. But we were also told that to be radical is bad, and that what one must always do first is to conform to the best behavior of one's community, and then try to make it better if one could. All of us children read the Bible in its entirety every year and memorized hundreds of Bible verses, and we had family prayers every day. God was a permanent member of our household, not just someone we encountered on Sunday. And it never occurred to me until I was a teenager that he was not chalking up my daily scores on Eternity's tablets. But despite the strain of living so intimately with God on a daily basis, the 9 of us children were still strong, healthy, and energetic youngsters who filled the days with play and sports and music and books and managed to live our lives most of the time on the careless level that young lives should be lived. Our father owned large business interests, employed hundreds of colored and white laborers, paid them the prevailing low wages, worked them the prevailing long hours, built separate mill towns and churches for Negroes and whites, saw to it that the commissary supplied commodities at high prices, and in general managed his affairs much as 10,000 other Southern businessmen managed theirs at the time. But in 1915, everything changed for us. Our father's businesses collapsed, mainly due to shipping blockades imposed during World War I, and he lost almost everything, including our home, the big rambling house and yard where we had all spent such happy childhood. All that was left was a piece of mountain property near Clayton, Georgia. He had bought it a few years earlier, and it was saved because he had deeded it to our mother. When I graduated from high school that same year, 2 of my brothers and my sister Esther and I moved with our parents, some dogs, some chickens, and a cow permanently to Screamer Mountain. Everything was different and would never be the same again. Well, times were hard all over the South. It wasn't just us. We were not alone in being poor. And it all got worse instead of better as time passed. As Christmas approached that first year, Esther and I agreed let's pretend it's not coming and spend the day as any other with no expectations. But our father, who had always reminded us that it was still much harder for others than it was for us, saw it differently. One day, as he was walking home from town after bartering some eggs for cornmeal, he stopped to visit with the prisoners on a chain gang who were working on the state roads nearby and were temporarily housed on a siding in some shabby railroad cars. He came home much distressed about their living conditions, looked into my mother's eyes and said, "Mama, wouldn't it be nice if we could have all those boys up here for Christmas dinner?" There was a very long silence. But finally, my mother nodded, "Yes." And my father walked all the way back into town to invite the prisoners and the guards to Christmas dinner at our house. The foreman said, "All of them?" And my father replied, "Well, of course, we couldn't leave any of them out now, could we?" Well, close to noon on Christmas Day, we saw them coming up the road, 48 men in stripes, both white and black, carefully watched by their guards. It was an unusually warm and sunny day, thank goodness, so the men all sat out on the grass in front of the house, while the guards leaned against the trees, keeping watch with their guns in hands. Some of the men were laughing and talking, but a lot of them were quiet and looked grim and suspicious. Well, now, Esther and I had helped our mother make caramel cakes, sweet potato pies, hot rolls, a rice and backbone dish, and a big pot of Brunswick stew. And we had a barrel of apples my father had polished the night before. I knew my mother was wondering what in the world she was going to feed the family in January. We were in the house getting out the china when we heard a hush fall outside, and then our Father's voice reading the Nativity story from St. Luke. So we eased on out onto the porch to listen. Now, we had been warned that 10 of the prisoners were killers. One had bashed in his own grandmother's head. 2 had robbed banks. 3 had stolen cars. 1 had burned down his neighbor's house and barn after an argument. And another had done a rape. But just now, all of them were sitting out there quietly, listening to that old story. Well, when my father finished and closed the Bible, he smiled and said, "Now, boys, let's all eat plenty and have us a good time. We're proud to have you here today, so let's just have us a Merry Christmas." And when Mother said she was ready, our father asked one of the killers to go in and help her with the heavy things. That young man said he'd be mighty glad to. And then the one in for raping and another for robbing a bank said they'd be pleased to help too. My sister and I followed them in the house, not feeling quite as casual as we hoped we looked. And when the guards moved with their guns to go in too, my father stopped them, said, "No, those boys will be all right." And you know they were. They brought out the big pots and pans to a serving table we'd set up on the porch. My sister and I served the plates, and the murderer and 2 of his friends passed them out to the men. Afterwards, the car thief and the 2 bank robbers and the arsonist said they'd be real glad to do the washing up. But my father told them no, nobody ought to wash dishes on Christmas, so let's just have us a good time, which all of us did. Well, that evening, after they had all gone, our family sat by the fire together, and my father talked about it. "Those men today," he said, "have made mistakes. But I have too, and so will you. But the one I most hope you won't make is to cling to the sins of my generation. You are not likely to commit a crime, but you may become blind and refuse to see what you should see. And not changing things, if you can think of something better to change them to, is worse than a crime." And then he said, "Mom, I believe I'll go to bed. You about ready?" She nodded. They got about halfway up the stairs, and he stopped, and he turned around, and he looked straight at me, and he said, "But that don't mean, sister, that you got to get radical." Then he laughed, and they went on up to bed. I must admit that there have been quite a few times in the years since when I have wondered if I should not have taken that advice more to heart. Up to this time, I had been a dreamy kid with no real responsibility about much of anything. But I loved books. And I had a consuming curiosity about everything. I wanted to know about how people lived, what they thought about, how they felt. Oh, and I was always asking religious questions. Where did I come from? Where am I going? Tell me, what is this all about eternity? And I remember my Sunday school teacher finally laying down the law that I was to never, ever, ever, ever ask her again about eternity. Otherwise, she didn't even want me to come back to Sunday school. So I turned away from the church for answers, and I tried to find out everything I wanted to know in books. I had read all of Shakespeare's plays by the time I was 10 or 11, and now I read authors like Defoe and Dickens and Thackeray and Browning, and then, I discovered it, and I turned to music. I practiced piano 3 or 4 hours a day. I was saturated with Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, Schubert, and Mozart, and was assured by my family that I was exceptionally talented. And miraculously, in that first hard year in Clayton, my parents somehow found a way to send me down to little Piedmont College in Demorest, Georgia. I don't know how they did it, but my expectations for that small mountain school were not very high. You know what? I was in for a big surprise. The faculty was excellent. My teachers were from Harvard, Cornell, Yale, Smith, and Vassar, and the classes were small, only 2 in my math class, 3 in my Latin class, and never more than 25 ever, even in French and English. I received excellent instruction there, and I can tell you I've never seen better anywhere since. I now know how lucky I was to have been there, but I was young, and I was living a rural life I could not quite accept, and I was longing for the wider world. As it eventually would turn out, I had been given far too much praise for what was really a small pianistic talent, but nonetheless, I dreamed of being a concert pianist. So in 1917, I left Georgia for Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore. I needed to work my way through, and I found a place to live in a, Dickensian establishment called the Margaret Bennett Home for Students and Working Girls. It was run by a very nosy house mother, but it was cheap, as I paid only $6 a week for room and board. And oh, I suffered from the cold, but I worked as an accompanist to pay my way through, and I dated all kinds of boys from Johns Hopkins, and I just loved it up there, even though I was appalled to learn how little I knew compared to so many of the other students. I did have to come back to Georgia for a while in 1918 to save some more money, and I taught for 4 months in a 2-room school in Tiger, Georgia. I was 20 years old, and I was also principal of the school because the former principal had been shot by one of the older boys. Needless to say, there was not a very good esprit de corps in the school when I arrived there. But remembering my own childhood, I tried to make it fun. We had a fine winter together, as it happens. I learned how to teach there. And then, when I could, I went back to Peabody for 3 more years. Well, by 1922, it was clear to everyone that my musical abilities did not match my grand dreams, but something which turned out to be extraordinary in my life did happen. I was offered a job to go to China and teach piano and harmony to young Chinese girls in the missionary school at Huchao. I accepted, of course, and the 3 years I spent there started me growing on every level of human experience. Well, by then I was an agnostic, but I was a good teacher. So they accepted me as I was, and I was drawn deep into a way of life I'd never experienced before. It was a life that was all new to me. I was the youngest person on the faculty and one of only 5 American women. Some of them suffered from acute loneliness, living so far from home in an ancient and alien culture, and they found themselves drawn into secret, passionate, and forbidden relationships with each other for comfort. I had never been exposed before to such a dark and intense emotional atmosphere, and I was deeply affected by the things I heard and saw there. But outside the school, white arrogance was everywhere, and white colonialism in all of its manifestations smoothed over by Christian talk, but poisoned by unchristian acts. The British and Americans completely segregated the Chinese, even the Christian Chinese. We would pray with them, yes, but we wouldn't play with them. There was poverty on a level which I found shocking. But I couldn't help it. I succumbed over and over to the enchantment of the landscape, the sheer beauty of the art and architecture, the sounds of temple bells and drums, and the elegant charm of the people. It was like a giant stage set of a whole way of life I'd never dreamed of before, and I could not take my eyes and ears off the show. I was confronted with Buddhism and Taoism and Confucianism for the first time. My mind and my senses came wide awake in Asia. When I came home 3 years later, I was not the same person. I did not want to come home to Georgia, but I had no choice. I came back in response to an SOS from my parents who were not well. A few years earlier, my father had started a camp for girls, Laurel Falls, on the grounds of our mountain home, but had grown too old and too weak to direct it and needed me to take it over, as it provided necessary income for the family. I returned with great reluctance and a huge sense of loss for the magic of China. But there were responsibilities I had to assume, regardless of my own wishes. So I did begin to grow up a little. Though I didn't know it then, I was coming home for good, and I would run that camp for almost 25 years. My career in music was also forgotten, probably just as well. I was acutely miserable, and so, of course, I began to write. I remember thinking I must write. I really must write. But I had no idea what to write about nor how to go about it. And this is where a woman named Paula Snelling began to mean a great deal in my life. She had come to work for my father at the camp when I was in China and stayed on to work with me. She was very well educated and intensely interested in poetry and books, and I was so drawn to that. We read together and we discussed literature and ideas for hours on end. I began to ask her to read what I had written, and she would do that, and then she would encourage me. And without that encouragement, I doubt I would have had the guts to go through those first years of groping. Paula was the only person in my life who ever appealed to both my mind and my heart simultaneously. In the early 1930s, we began to spend winters together in an apartment in Macon, Georgia, where Paula was a high school math teacher. I was very happy to find myself becoming an important part of the liberal intellectual community there. And in 1935, I was actually elected president of the Macon Writers Club, which I felt at the time to be a very prestigious position. But in the summer of 1935, Paula suffered a nearly fatal riding accident and had to retire permanently from teaching due to her injuries. So we found ourselves for the first time living year-round at Laurel Falls. Since we could not get out to the world anymore, we decided to try to bring a bit of the world to us. So in 1936, we began a little magazine together, which we ended up calling South Today. We published it with pennies left over from the camp and never had any financial help from the outside. And I was able to do a lot of writing for it. And it grew and lived for 10 years and had 10,000 subscribers by the time we decided it had served its purpose. I'm afraid we fancied ourselves young rebels who were just out to destroy a lot of old worn-out cliches in Southern society, but we were searching for something real and valid too. We learned a lot about the South, much about human relations, and a lot more about writers and writing. And it was a great experience. And in lieu of payment sometimes, we were able to invite our contributors to come up and stay with us on the mountain as our guests. 1936 was the first year we had our very first biracial house party. And those gatherings continued. We wanted to exchange ideas and learn from each other and think about changing the future. Oh, we were changing the camp too. I laugh when people call me an extremist because it took me 10 years to do what I really wanted to do there, but gradually it became a relaxed, progressive little community. Oh, we still had riding, tennis, swimming, archery, all the other usual competitive camp activities. But we also developed interest in sculpture, painting, modern dance, creative writing, and theater. And especially amongst the girls there in the regular and frank discussion of ideas and human problems. Even though we wanted it, and our campers begged for it, we never had Negro children as campers because the parents of the girls would simply not allow it. So instead, we would invite the colored children up from the community for visits and have parties there with them. And we would dance and they would eat with us in the dining hall and sometimes spend the night. But that was all we were able to get away with at the time. And during all these years, I was still writing novels and novellas. I remembered that I had written a novel at about 10 years old, which the grown folks in the household had read aloud to each other with what seemed to me at the time unreasonable delight. It had not seemed at all funny to me when I wrote it. But in fact, the first piece of mine ever published was done so because the Macon Telegraph found it so funny. And they made a feature out of it. It was a ridiculous memoir about how my car was stopped and searched by state police and revenue officers for liquor. They had mistaken me for a rum runner, and I was chased down and searched 3 different times. It was thrilling. The first real novel I wrote, though, was about China. Just as I had seen it, felt it, smelled it, and touched it. It seemed to fascinate the publishers who read it, but all of them were shocked by it. I had simply written candidly about the human relationships I had observed there, and they all found it to be not only hair-raising, but exceptionally deviant. No one was ready to publish it, but then, of course, this was nearly 30 years before the work of Mr. Henry Miller made its appearance in America. I also wrote several novellas which were very frank and autobiographical, and decided to not even try to get them published, as I realized members of my family might have been hurt very much by them. And then one day I decided to write a very quiet book about life as I had known it in a small town as a child. So I started what became Strange Fruit and worked on it for almost 6 years. It was turned down by 10 editors. They all said it was simply not interesting. One of them did say that it might appeal, at most, to a possible handful of mature and thoughtful readers. To tell the truth, I thought so myself. I agreed with him, so I just put it up on the shelf, put it away, and forgot about it. But in 1943, a man named Frank Taylor, who was an editor for the publishing firm Reynolds and Hitchcock in New York, happened to hear about the manuscript from a mutual friend of ours. He came down to Georgia and asked to see it, so I just took it out and let him read it, just like it was, off the shelf, not really even finished. His firm accepted it within 36 hours. That it would shock anyone never crossed my mind, and I never dreamed of writing a book about race relations. To me, it was a story of mothers and sons in search of each other, a story of brothers and sisters who remain strangers forever, and the story of a white man and a black woman who love each other, not according to the rules their culture dictates, but according to the deepest longings of their hearts. It was real human experience that I wanted to write about. But as I was writing, I did begin to understand, as I never had before, the terrifying injury which segregation inflicts on both races, the barriers which shut people off from each other and from beauty and truth and grace and from life itself. I did what I always do. I tried to look for truth as I wrote, and I put down only what I found. Well, the book began to sell like wildfire, and it was already a bestseller 3 weeks before its official publication date, which was February 29, 1944. I was staying in Atlanta with my brother Joseph, who was then minister of the Big Glen Memorial Methodist Church on the Emory campus. And we were waiting for the review to come out in the Atlanta newspaper. He was calm on the surface, but I knew underneath he was just as jittery as I was. He had himself been deeply shocked when he read the book. And another brother had asked him, "Why, you're usually quite liberal about such matters." And Joseph answered, "Well, yes, but of course. Well, I just had no idea that Lil knew all of those words." Well, the review appeared in the Atlanta Journal, and it was not so good, though the reviewer did say that it was the best dialect she had ever seen in a Southern book. Of course, I felt greatly let down, but actually think now she was trying to be as nice as she felt she could be, though she was damning me with faint praise. Well, the very next day, the Atlanta mothers of some of my campus had planned a lovely luncheon for me in honor of the book's publication at the Capital City Club on Peachtree Street. I felt safe about it because I knew none of them had read the book yet. But after lunch, one of the little women chirped up and said, "Oh, we're only a block away from Davison's. Let's just walk on down there and get copies of Miss Lil's book so she can autograph it for us." I was terrified, but pretended to think it was a wonderful idea. So off to Davison's we went and marched right down the aisle to the book department, where, thank goodness, I took a deep breath. Not a single copy of the book was in sight. Well, the little lady marched up to the counter, looked the lady in the eye there, and said, "Where is Miss Lil's book?" The lady blushed, dove under the counter, and pulled out about 3 copies and held them up like this. And the little lady said, "Well, that's better, but we all want one." And there were about 12 ladies there. So the thoroughly embarrassed sales lady kept diving until she brought up all 12 books. And then I heard, "Now, Miss Lil, you can autograph one for each and every one of us." So there I stood in the book department in Davison's, autographing all those copies, wondering what in the world they would think of me when they finally did read it. But a few days later, enthusiastic reviews appeared in the New York Times and the Herald Tribune and other newspapers all over the country. Many more thousands of books were being sold, so in late February, I flew to New York City to celebrate and was met at the airport by my publisher, who put a check for $5,000 in my hand and said, "A little something to start with." I had never had anything like that kind of money anywhere near me or in my hand, except for the time that I had to mortgage the camp and get it from the bank. And then 1 month later, Strange Fruit was banned in Boston. It happened like this. A man bought a copy to send his daughter at college for a birthday present. He took it home and read it first and was so shocked by a certain four-letter word in it that he called the police and told them it was indecent and should be banned. The police went after it the next day, looked at the word, and all of a sudden, all the booksellers in Boston were told to stop selling it, which most of them did immediately. Well, Bernard DeVoto, the big famous editor then, was outraged and decided to put it to a legal test. So he deliberately bought a copy at a Cambridge bookstore, telling the bookseller that he might be arrested if he sold it to him. Well, both of them were arrested, and they went to court on obscenity charges. Well, before the trial my publisher did try, he called the police commissioner of Boston and asked him, just what would Miss Smith have to do to, quote, make the book decent enough, unquote, to be sold in Boston's bookstores?
Among others, he said, she's got to take out the four-letter word, take out the raping scene, and take out the scenes where the breast and rump are mentioned.
Well, as you can well imagine, I totally refused. So we went to court, lost the case, and for a very long time after that, the book could not be sold anywhere in the state of Massachusetts. But many, many writers and columnists defended the book in print, and we got more and more publicity and sold more and more books all over the rest of the country. Oh, I must tell you this. There was also a banning by the U.S. Post Office, which lasted less than 3 days due to secret White House intervention. In late March, an order went out forbidding the sending of publications advertising the book through the U.S. mail. The newspapers immediately protested, writing stories and sending telegrams to the White House. And here's what happened next. My publisher, Mr. Hitchcock, called Eleanor Roosevelt, whom he knew, and he flew to Washington to have breakfast with her. After which, she talked to her husband over lunch. After which, he talked to the big ones at the post office who must be talked to, and by dinner time, a new notice was sent out rescinding that order. But by this time, the country was already reeling with it, and the book sales were shooting up like a rocket. It wasn't the banning itself that did it, but the reaction. The writers filling their columns day after day with stories about the book and about me. Well, I have to tell you, I was a big celebrity in New York City for close to 2 years. Everybody recognized me, and I loved taking my nephews and their dates and Esther and Paula to all the luxurious restaurants, and happily wasted lots of money at the Pierre and the Plaza and 21. Fame and fortune, however, did prove to be hard on creativity, hard on one's intelligence, and hard on one's habits of quiet study. But all during that time, I did try to hold on to enough of my old life to keep me sane and real, and what I felt deep down that I truly was. And when I got back home to the mountain for the first time, I had enough money to do some of the things I had always wanted to do, and I made the most of it. I could buy equipment for the camp that we sorely needed, especially for our theater. I paid off the camp's mortgage, and I helped every member of the family who needed anything. And damn it, I bought myself all the clothes I had wanted ever since we lost all our money when I was a teenager. But I kept my same old Chevrolet, and I've never had a more expensive car, and I still lived in the cabins at the camp, and life went on exactly as it always had, except the debts were paid. And we could buy wine and whiskey and garlic olives and caviar. And I kept writing, though there was never to be another bestseller. You see, when Boston banned my book, it was legal. Everybody heard about it, and that helped sell it a lot. Even though it picked up a lot of second and third class readers instead of the first class readers we were aiming for. I mean, we picked up a lot of readers who bought the book just to see a word you could see scrawled on the wall of a toilet for free. I mean, I have never understood why anybody would buy a book for that purpose. Can you? Oh, the South is very proud that it never officially banned any of my books, but it learned that to smother them was better than banning them, and that is what it began to do. By not reviewing them, by not having them in the stores to sell, and by not ever letting a good word appear in the newspapers about them. That is complete and highly efficient censorship, and something you can't get your fingers on. You can't take that to court. In 1949, 5 years after Strange Fruit, I published my next book, a personal and sociological memoir called Killers of the Dream. This time, the Atlanta Constitution did print something about it. Mr. Jack Tarver, who was an associate editor at the time, wrote a column about it for the editorial page. The headline reads, "A New Book, Strange Tripe." And his opinion continues. "Lillian Smith has written a new book, and brother, is it a stinker. You remember Lillian. She wrote Strange Fruit. This one should have been called Strange Literature. It's not a novel, nor could you call it nonfiction. It is, in short, neither fish nor fowl, though I must say it gives off the aroma of both." Lillian belabors one fact of an already shop-worn obsession for 256 pages, and when she is done, one wonders what in the name of obfuscation she was trying to get at. Talk about your devious demagoguery. Not only is this claptrap, but very badly done claptrap. Look, don't get me wrong. Miss Smith is entitled to her racial views. 1 trillion light years to the left of center though they may be. My quarrel is only with her method of expressing it, and with publishers who waste good ink, paper, and man-hours printing such tripe. There is, I must admit, one aspect of this inexcusable effusion which pleases me. It is as free of dirt as Strange Fruit was full of it. Thus, it will certainly be a disappointment to those connoisseurs of the pornographic who go in for literature for lust's sake, as well as to those of Miss Smith's following who have labored under the delusion that somewhere in her fervor-packed being there was room for a trace of talent. The New York Herald Tribune called Killers of the Dream brave, honest, and heartrending. But I think what meant most to me was I received a letter from a 96-year-old woman who told me that now that I had finally written the truth, she could die in peace. You know what I think? I think that every one of you should just go out as soon as you can, get a copy of both books, read them for yourselves, and make up your own minds about them. Oh, and for any of you out there who may be thinking of writing yourselves, I can tell you that having your first book be a big, big bestseller is probably the worst thing that can happen to a serious writer. Don't ever long for the fame that comes with it. You are called bitch and saint. You are called heroine and whore. You are praised for your courage and sneered at for your obscenity. You are made into a stereotypical image, and no one sees you as a person, whether they love and admire your book or hate and fear it. And all kinds of things get into print that are not remotely true. You are always misquoted, even when the interviewers are friendly, as they come to question you with your minds already made up. And their questions are shaped to produce certain answers. I wonder why anyone who has ever gone through this sort of thing again ever believes anybody from the newspaper. But even I still do sometimes, and I have to remind myself that the story may be twisted or distorted or wholly untrue, just as so many stories on me were. But there is one story that I can stop right now and get straight for you. And that's the title of this book, Strange Fruit. The novel was first called, when I first wrote it, Jordan is So Chilly. I took that from an old spiritual about God's people crossing the river into the promised land. But my publisher really wanted me to change it, so I agreed. And I had used the term strange fruit a long time ago in an essay I had written when I talked about what segregation had done to white culture as well as black culture. And I said, we white people, we are all of us the strange fruit of that way of life. And yes, segregation is the theme of all my writing. If we look at it even more so in a bigger way than race, one finds it in some form wherever men or women try to shut themselves away from each other, or from knowledge, or from a reality which seems too full of danger. But those of us who feel free and don't need segregation and don't want it in any form, we often say that we're wasting our creative lives fighting this monster. We hate it because it hurts us as writers and artists to always have to give so much of ourselves to it. Oh, and people call it your mission in life. And that's ghastly. I mean, who wants a mission? Makes you sound like a little, I don't know, busybody, a little pompous little reformer, running around trying to change everything and messing everybody up. And you know, I just don't like it. You go anywhere, you go to a party, and somebody comes up to you, and all they want to talk about is race and segregation, and, well, sometimes I'm polite and sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I just say to them, do you know what matters most to me? Do you know that it's painting and poetry and philosophy, music? Those are the things that matter to me, Lillian Smith. Those are the things that matter most to me. So let's get off this other stuff for a while. Let's see, what else have I sacrificed? I have often had my life threatened. I've lost quite a few old friends. I've lost some very, very precious manuscripts to suspicious fires in buildings up at the camp, including the full manuscript of my novel about China. And I have been blacklisted by quite a few publications. You know, many times I have felt that if I went to New York to live or to Paris to live, it would all begin to fade. It does hurt. But you know, I want it to hurt. I want it to hurt because I believe a writer stops writing when the wound heals. And I want to keep the wound open. This is where my roots are. And I want my mind to cover the whole earth. But I want my mythic roots to stay here. The roots of my imagination to stay on home ground. You know, once I thought I wanted to be one of the world's finest writers. Now, all I want is to have done a good job. I believe that every creative act, every poem, every picture has meaning and will count. I believe that every honest idea, an honest expression of dissent will count. I believe that every gesture of courage or faith or mercy will count. And I believe that every time we turn away from arrogance and lies, that will count too. I hope that I have not hurt too many people. I hope I have loved deeply and well. And I hope that none of my dreams will ever die. I do not fear death. To me, it is just a new beginning.
Lillian Smith died on September 28, 1966, 2 years after the passage of the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964. She was buried at home on the grounds of Laurel Falls. The service was very short, at her request, with readings from her book, The Journey, and music from The Edge of the Woods. It was what she had wished for, in her own words, a beautiful ceremonial, an escort into the unknown by one's friends.